So we won't keep you long between now and your beer. But before we start, I wanted to measure what is the level of the audience so we can tune our answers to what you guys would like to take away. So who here has raised money already? Okay, 4. Who here is trying to raise money? All right, okay. And who here are developers? Right, majority developers, split between people who have done it before and is done for the first time. Helps? Yeah. Right, so we will start with a quick round of introductions. Right? I'm Olifiers. I am the founder of Bossa Studios, which is a PC games nearby. And we made games such as Surgeon Simulator, I Am Bread, which are very quirky, and big MMORPGs like Worlds Adrift, using technology such as improbable spatial S and whatnot. Okay? But you have a wonderful panel here of people who know much more than I do about raising money, making games. So let's go through them. First, Alexis.
Hi, so I run a fund called Kowloon Nights. We're doing project financing for developers. We're currently working across 13 games all across the world, in Japan, in Europe, in the US. Yeah, we started about a year and a half ago, and we reviewed 560 games since we started.
Good.
Hi, I'm Caroline. I am the founder and creative director of Interior Night, which is a narrative game studio. Started over 15 months ago or something. There's now 30 of us, and we're doing our first game with Sega. In the past, I was lead game designer at Quantic Dream, so I worked on games like Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls, amongst others.
Cool. My name is Dino. I'm mostly known for co-founded and running Playlet, which created Limbo and Inside. I did that for 10 years. Now I bootstrapped and started another studio called, and in total I have raised money 3 times from investors.
Hey, I'm Michael. So I help to run Makers Fund, and so we're a gaming industry focused VC fund. We invest globally, and we invested in companies like Clan Games, Tiny Build, Bossa Studios, amongst others.
Yeah, so Michael's also an investor at Bossa. If you were looking for an investor, it's a good one to have. Right, so the first question I will ask the panel today is the people here who have been successfully funded. What are the things that they look at before taking that step? What were the things that they were looking to get? What were the things that they were trying to avoid? And how they went about achieving the goal of being successfully funded. Dino, you've done it 3 times. It's fair to assume that the first time was on Play Dead?
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit the story there? What was the things that you had in mind when you started the process? And afterwards, after you raised the second and third time, how that was different?
Okay, so the raise in Play Dead was super classic. We didn't know anything, and we pitched to all the wrong and some of the right people. We raised first from a small government innovation fund thingy, where it's kind of, I felt it was kind of easy to get the money. We can raise for us from a more traditional venture fund. But yeah, I would say but both of those raises were really bad. Obviously, we need the money, and that's how I think most developers feel. And we got those, but it was like we had no idea of why. We knew we needed money, but we didn't know anything about what the exit game for us was at that point. And I feel that was what hindered a lot of the good parting that could have been done at that point. I could definitely go more into details with that, but the difference with the new one is like we were super cautious about not so much who to meet, but what type of end game we wanted with Jumpship. So we were specifically looking for a certain type of investors. Obviously, we talk with both publishers and investors, and I think you have to do that to make just in finding out what you want. It's also, I think, important to talk with all of the options, because when I raised last time, it was in 2009, and there's a lot have happened, and a lot of new funding schemes has arrived since that time. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. So essentially what you're saying is that the difference between the first time you did and the wiser version of yourself, when you raised, you already had a game plan. You knew from the start what you would do with the money, and that enabled you to choose the right investor rather than taking any investor. Is that a fair
exactly.
way to sum it up?
Yeah.
All right, fair
Better than I
enough.
said it myself, so yeah, that's pretty fair.
Fair enough. So, Caroline, you didn't raise for your current company, right? You bootstrapped it, and then you kept yourself independent by going a different route, working with a publisher.
Yeah.
Why did you make that decision?
So, coming from, well, I'm a game designer, so I always basically Quantic worked for Sony, so I thought, oh, when you want to make a game, you go to a publisher. So there was some of that. Like I thought it was important to speak to people with a good understanding of what development was. So I spoke to a few investors, and honestly, it didn't really click because they were looking for the business plan, like what's the exit. I'm like, oh, I just have a cool pitch actually, and if it works well, it will make money. And then, but there wasn't really a 10x or a business plan in really factored into the studio vision. So it didn't really click with them, whereas pitching to publishers, well, it's a matter of finding the right publisher for you and also someone that you can fit into their portfolio strategy. But once you get that, there's a good understanding of like this, and so you make your ask for the game budget, development budget, and then that's it. And they didn't take any shares in the company, so we're like 100% independent. But because so the deal is with Sega, what I just want to add is that it's not completely traditional publishing deal in the sense that we're like an incubation studio for them. So they provide like extra help or services, like if we want finance advice or legal advice, or and they provide like more services than traditionally. Like they pay for our software licenses when we need to. So it's more like, and they're interested in the long-term relationship. So they do sign this game, but with the understanding of that, they want to see the studio grow, and that hopefully we'll make another game together, a couple of games, more games together. And maybe at some point, we'll talk investment, but at the moment, it's like just 100% independent.
Right. My experience is different from Dino's and Caroline's in that I started with a game plan, and worked with the first investor who was a strategic investor. He was called Cheung, and they were a TV company. They own IPs that you know of, such as MasterChef and Merlin and whatnot, right? And the idea was that we would make games on Facebook with IPs. The problem is that halfway through, Facebook became no longer a viable games platform. So when we pivoted out of Facebook and went into PC, we bought back, and we became independent. And then we managed to raise 2 more times. We raised a seed round with London Venture Partners, which is specialized in games. And it's good because they understand the business better than most and worked with a lot of synergies with us. And then we did a round A with London Venture Partners, Maker Fund, and Maker Studio, my friend René's, Maker Fund, and Atomico, which is one of the biggest funds in Europe, right? And at this time around, we also had a game plan, but as every plan who goes into the heat of battle proves itself, it doesn't last very long. But at least by having the game plan, you know exactly how to filter the investors that you would like to bring to the table and why. What are the synergies that they bring? What are the strengths that they bring? The connections to the industry they bring? And the portfolio they already have that might help you out achieve what you want. But we have here two different representatives of the ecosystem of investors. We have Makers Fund, represented by Michael, which is a brand new type of fund that only invests in games. And we have Kowloon, represented by Alexis, who is not really a traditional VC and is not really a publisher, but they fund games. So I will leave Michael to start and explain how Kowloon, and then we tail with Alexis.
Sure, yeah. So the genesis of Makers Fund is that, after so many years of looking at the industry and seeing some of the struggles and the lack of dedicated funding in not just studios, but also companies who are working, either platforms or technologies or, as really supporting roles, middleware, for example. Throughout the industry, dedicated funding was difficult. And I think it came from really either a lack of understanding or people who were not very kind of strategic in nature. So in 2017, myself and Jason Chi, who I've known for about 10 years now, we kind of decided, let's put together a fund and let's dedicate it purely towards the gaming industry. And this kind of very quickly came into fruition, and we were very fortunate to be able to raise this large fund. And we said, look, I think there's two big things that need to be solved. One is the lack of funding in the general sort of interactive entertainment industry. And two, also recognition of the fact that it's becoming more and more global in nature, right? So I think you need to be able to be thinking about North America, Europe, Asia. We put together this kind of a traditional venture capital vehicle, but with the one kind of shift of being able to write much larger checks of a couple of $1 million, supporting studios and companies through multiple rounds of funding, but with the kind of all the people in the industry having come from gaming and basically spending all our time in the industry and thinking really long-term about it. And so as we've kind of put this together, we've kind of realized that actually there isn't enough people funding in the industry who focus all their time thinking about the long-term trends, right? And a good example of this is last year, who would have predicted what's happening now between Epic and Unity and Discord, let alone the people that, the companies that people aren't even talking about that are also trying to make their own individual plays in distribution. And we haven't even talked about game streaming yet or subscription methods. And I think as we work together with not just Henrique, but also other founders in the industry, we see more and more, I guess, benefits of having this kind of longer-term view in the industry. So the funding vehicle itself is quite traditional. We're equity investors, and we look to invest a couple of $1 million each time. But I think we look to really differentiate by our experience, our knowledge, and really our outlook on the industry itself.
Michael is not making a good representation of how much knowledge that Michael and Jay have together. I know these guys for a long time, and I know a lot of people in the industry. They are regarded as some of the most wise and the most creative people in the games industry in general. And this is something that you should always consider when raising funds. If the synergy and what comes along with the package, not just the money, but will they be there with you when things get tough? Will they be there with you when the things get good and open doors that you didn't see were available? And that leads me to Alexis, who Kowloon Nights is completely different because we have seen a few doors there that no one else have seen so far.
Yeah, very different. I think the genesis for Kowloon started quite a few years ago. I was one of the co-founders of ID at Xbox, and we had opened up the platform for independent devs and created a fund that was supporting developers. One thing was apparent to us is that developers always needed funding. And sometimes it materialized through a publishing deal, but there wasn't any vehicle to go and say, I want to self-publish, or I don't really know what's my route to market, but I need money. And so we kept thinking that we need to create an entity that was able to provide capital to fund projects specifically and let developers decide and have the flexibility to go with a publisher, self-publish, or just decide much later on what they wanted to do. And so this took a little bit of time to figuring out what the exact model would be. And Kowloon was designed to be able to fund projects, very big and very small, to support developer, give them the flexibility that they need to take their project as far as they want and either go on the market by themselves or engage with someone later on that could help them publish. When I look ahead, and Michael mentioned some of the changes happening in our industry, subscription arriving and new platforms opening up and new companies entering, there's an increased amount of capital coming in available to developers, which means that you don't necessarily want to make a choice early on. You want to give yourself time. And I think that the function of a publisher is going to change. If you look back 15, 20 years, the publishing contracts and the publishing deals that are being offered are quite similar to what is being offered today. Because you need a publisher to get access to a dev kit, to an engine, and to simply have the ability to build your game. That has changed quite a bit because now you can release the game yourself, you have access to engines by yourself, you can give dev kits by yourself. And so we felt decoupling the publishing function and the financing function made a lot of sense. And then we wanted to look ahead and say, well, if 5 or 10 years from now, a significant amount of the premium games are going through a subscription model, well, what is the function of a publisher, right? And so we want to give developers the ability and the flexibility to have their project funded, take it as far as they want up to release, and then decide which route they want to take.
So here we have a mix of people who have raised before and people who are looking to raise for the first time, but they all share the same challenge, which is what are the things that I have to look forward when thinking about who is the person I'm going to choose to work with? And it's like a marriage, right? If you're doing it right, you are thinking about an investor that's going to be with you for 5, maybe longer. So you need to understand what are the synergies that I'm looking for in an investor. So, Dino, can you shed a light on that? What are a very simple kind of tip that people can start with?
Yeah, I can also start by saying something a bit controversial. You say synergy, and that's actually what's it called? It's almost like there's a partner for everyone, but like there's really bad investors and good investors out there. And
yes.
Like there's also bad projects and good projects. So
the developers have a good share of the blame. Yes.
Yeah. No, but I think it both ways. Maybe more developers. I don't know, but. So finding a good synergy is like you have to look at yourself. Are you a worthwhile project to invest in? Are you investable? Do you have value? Do you have a team? What do you have? Before you can find synergy in an investor. So it's just like everything else in life. Like to have that synergy, you have to look at yourself. I forgot the question.
Is a tip for how to raise, right? And that is a good tip there. You're saying that you have to understand what is the value in yourself for the investor.
Yes.
A good tip for that is that line up a few investors that you're not necessarily interested in and try your pitch and try your ideas with them first rather than going for the guys that you actually want investment from, right? There's a lot of investors out there. You can afford to do that. So find what people see and don't see on your proposal. And that might be a good way for you to prepare for the next step, right?
Yeah, I mean, our position is a little different because we evaluate projects. And so we have less concerns around the founders, but what we find is that a lot of people that we meet are creatives. They have an idea, they have a game idea, a concept, a prototype, but they're not CEOs. They've not been trained or prepared to run a company. And it's a completely different job than creating games. And so we're in a very fortunate position to pick projects or people that we believe in, help them through that phase where they build their game, but also take some time to help them learn about what it means to run a company, what it means to raise funding, what it means to bring in an investor when you need to. And so there are avenues today, like Makers, work great for capital investment into your company, but we try to spend a little bit of time also giving them help on learning what it means to run a business, do raises, etc.
There are studios, the investors today, who have even the infrastructure to coach and mentor the teams that they invest on, right? This is something that you should bear in mind. Caroline, your experience with the publisher so far, has it been positive? Are you happy with that? And any particular thing you have to do to break through to them?
You mean to get the deal signed? That
yes.
we have to do? No, I'm happy with the relationship so far. It's nice because we get the creative control. They're trying to help us, like, look at the pitfalls in advance, like help us with user tests, etc. But that's classic stuff. And I mean, before we did sign the deal with Sega, like we had another publisher, and then it went on to, would you consider that same game with a different IP? And this is where I realized, like, okay, we're not a good fit because they don't get what the game vision is. Like, they try and retrofit it or like shoehorn it into another business model for them because they're interested in that cash machine here. So I just say that, just making sure that the publisher you pick, which you might not have 10 publishers interested, right? But then the publisher you pitch to you make sure that they understand what this is, and they're not going to be trying to like change the game into something that you don't like, because then afterwards it's like too late to change that, and you'll end up doing something you don't really believe in. And I think you'd rather not do that.
Okay, fair enough. And Michael, you have seen hundreds of pitches, I imagine, right? From these pitches, what was the element of the best pitch you have seen that is worth people knowing?
I think that it's a couple of things, right? The best pitches I've ever seen, they've always had a very, very strong kind of vision of where they want the studio or the company to go. And you know, I think this kind of goes to Dino's point on having an exit strategy or long-term strategy, because it's easy to focus on just your project that you're trying to do, and they're going to be the best MMO ever, you know, and this is why all these other MMOs suck. But also I think it's really important to think, okay, so once you've built that, are you going to continue to build that? Are you just working on kind of this mystical game too? Or where do you see your studio or company in 3 to 5 to 7 years? And there's no right or wrong answer there, but it's very important to have that kind of long-term vision, right? That's one really important thing. And I think the other second really important thing is, this is kind of a different, answering not directly the question that you asked me, but I think an important point for who you consider or what to look for when thinking about who to work with. And you know, I think it's really, really important to try your best to have a long-term relationship, even at distance, before you choose who to work with. So just because you're choosing, you need the money, not necessarily today, but you need to raise, say, 12 months from now, I feel like it's very important to start talking to the people that you think will matter 12 months or 18 months, even 24 months down the line. And that's because you also want to understand, is this person that I'm choosing to work with, are they the right person for me? Who can I talk to around their ecosystem that can tell me more about them? But also it helps the counterparty, the investor, also understand you more, right? And the longer you have that relationship, the easier it is to create the trust, and the easier it is to understand one another. And to kind of Caroline's point is that, does this person really understand my vision? And when you've known someone, you've met each other once every 3 months for the last 12, 18 months, it's far easier to articulate that than to do it when you're rushing because you need to fund your studio in 2 months or 3 months. And it becomes a kind of a desperation, or you'll take any investor, right? It's very suboptimal. And so I think the key message here really is plan really as far down the line as you can, right? And I think that kind of counts for not just all funding, but also partnerships in general.
Yeah, because you're more attractive when you don't need money.
That's completely true.
Yeah.
If you don't need help, you don't need money.
Yeah.
It's always very powerful to say, oh, we're comfortable right now, but we're happy to just keep this kind of platonic relationship going on. And that's great, right? You don't lose any of the kind of empowerment that you need to make that deal when you need to, right?
Yeah, the platonic thing is a good term, because I've heard from a lot of people that raising is almost like dating.
Absolutely.
So the more people you date, the more savvy you become. And when you say no to someone, usually they become more interested in you. So it's something that we all should bear in mind. Is there any questions on the audience you guys would like to ask? There you go, that was fast.
Well, I have a specific question. I don't know, but anyway, so it's just we have a VR and AR game studio, and we have an episodic adventure game, which is a very good IP in our mind, and we want to bring it to PC and mobile non-VR version, and we're looking for publishers for that. How do you see such model? And first of all, how do you see episodic adventure games in general in mobile and PC? And do you think this is in general a good idea or not? Like what we are trying to do?
Who wants to take this one?
From the publishing yeah, I mean, we get a lot of pitches of people, one, coming from AR and VR, who say, oh, actually, we probably should ship on PC and console because things did not work out the way we were hoping. So that's fairly common right now. I think episodic and narrative in general is a genre that's interesting. There is a sort of benchmark of what we expect to be interesting. There's again a whole few years of Telltale going on that we now have. We know what works and what doesn't, and so we expect to see something innovative, interesting, different, and IP is not enough. And that model has proven to kind of get tiring for customers very quickly. And so I think for us, if I look at it as a partner, is this innovative? Is this different? Is this unique? And is there a strong voice behind it? Every game that we sign has a very strong creative voice and a very strong creative vision, and is usually uncompromising. And unfortunately, we do see a lot of things that are trying to go down a path because they've seen that the trend seems to work, and that's something that we try to stay away from because usually success comes from people who have a very, very strong creative vision.
One thing I could add that you touched briefly is that it has been proven on track record that usually IP is a good amplifier to a successful game. Right? In its own right, it usually doesn't carry a lot of weight anymore because the audience have been burned a lot with poor IP implementation over the years. Right? It's something to bear in mind.
That's one whole question, if anybody's.
What's the best way for reaching investors? Because one of the biggest problems or troubles that we are having now is to be listened. I mean, to be able to give the pitch to investors, because at the end you can send the deck, but the deck is just paper. And I think that most investors invest in person, in people. So what's the best way for reaching investors?
Marchal, want to take this one?
Yeah, sure. I think the best possible way is through a warm introduction, through someone that already has a relationship or is in the circle of that investor already. And that, with almost 100% certainty, will definitely work. The second thing that I would also suggest is, if you have a sort of a forum like this, right, like these kind of events, I think arranging a meeting either through the systems itself or just talking in person is also a very kind of surefire way to get attention even shorter. I mean, a lot of ways that people try frequently, and I think university are very, very difficult to get cut through. I think one is just emailing like blindly through the site or through LinkedIn or some of things. They are a lot harder to go through, and just to share a bit of insight from the other perspective, right? It's almost like you have a lot of people contacting you every day, and so if there really is someone who is very distinctive and very, very strong, it's almost like you have 100 messages and one of them is genuine. However, 99 of them are people who are not even game studios, but they're still in the same inbox. So therefore, just as an inbox, statistically looking through that is just mind-bogglingly kind of difficult. So that's why I encourage a personal discussion, because in the end of the day, as you completely rightly said, right, this is a it's a relationship-driven industry, and so anything involving people is always the best way.
Also, obviously, it's easier for me now to get through to a lot of people, but in the old days, I've been doing a shit ton of cold calling, and I found this system. If you really quickly, with a few words, prove to the receiver that you come with some kind of value, it makes it so much easier. And at one point, it even became a challenge for me, to get, part of the jokes like, who should we meet? And I got a meeting with gay people because I was like, I cold called him. I made a mail to him. So I made a mail so short